Alrighty, welcome back to another episode of the F Yeah podcast. That's Flatirons Young Adults. Christian Ambry once again.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Hey, before we get started, do you want to just give us, I feel like we were just talking about this. Do you want to give us like a quick trip update?
Yes, for those of you guys who don't know, my son's name is Trip David. Love him to death. I think like the update is one, he's sleeping through the night. This is a big
Boom,
deal.
big time.
This is a big deal, okay? If you don't have kids, it's not a big deal. It's a big deal if you start getting sleep.
Does that mean you're sleeping through the night?
No.
Ah.
But it's sleeping so much better.
Great.
I find myself waking up at 3 a.m. when he used to wake up just staring at the monitor. But it's getting better. See, like it's a big deal.
Yeah.
The only other update is like for everyone who's met him at Young Adults, they know this, but he is the chunkiest kid that's
And
ever.
cutest.
He's so
He's
freaking
adorable.
cute, dude. Like you actually the feeling of wanting to eat your babies. I get it. The look
sorry,
that Christian
what?
just gave me, dude. He's
Yeah, can you explain that,
He's
please?
so chunky. You're telling me you're looking at
You're
his
talking
cheeks.
like jokingly, like, oh, I just want to gobble you
You
up.
want to take a bite out of those his
Okay.
cheek?
About to say, we have a whole nother issue at hand here, and I might have to
Listen,
call child services. But
Listen, someone listening who even doesn't have a baby
Mm.
gets it. They're like, yes, I've wanted to just like take a bite. You know what?
I
We
feel
call
like
that.
I feel like maybe the ladies get that. I don't think I've ever heard a guy say I want to eat that baby.
I'd be curious, but we call that feeling in my house the nitties. It's called nitties. And it's the feeling of wanting to like gnaw on a baby's chunky
interesting.
legs.
Where I come from, that's called cannibalism. So the nitties, whatever we want to say.
We call it the nitties.
Oh, that's
my
awesome.
Dude.
We were talking about this because on your Instagram you have, you show me pictures and I see pictures of them all the time. It's crazy thinking how, like, when I want to see pictures of myself as a baby, how much times have changed. It's like I got to go to the scrapbook in my parents' basement to see the printed pictures that you bought the $20 camera from Walmart from and had it printed there with a little date.
Yep.
And our kids and kids nowadays, babies right now, they're going to be able to go to like
That's
their
crazy.
parents' Instagram and Facebook, and they're going to be able to see these really high-def photos of themselves, which is wild.
Crazy.
It's
Someday
nuts.
it's going to be like what is that called?
VR?
Hol-
Hologram?
Yeah, probably. I should have known the word. before I
Something
said-
like that,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's going to be crazy.
Yeah, you're going to be like relive your memories or something.
That's my trip update. So
Love it.
irrelevent to what we're talking
Yep,
about today.
completely irrelevant.
So perfect segue,
It's
right?
perfect. Yeah, fantastic.
Here it
From
is.
cannibalism to dating as a Christian. Here we are.
Intentional
Two things that are
dating.
very different. Hopefully very different anyways. Now, today we really want to have a conversation around, and there are plenty of more conversations to come around Christian dating because it's confusing. It's weird. To my knowledge, at least, there is no dating section of the Bible. I flipped through it a number of times and never found anywhere in any Old Testament, New Testament, any book that says dating, here's how to date. And if there is one and I've missed it, please DM us at Flatirons YA and tell me.
Terrible pastor.
Because there's an entire book of the Bible or section of the Bible that's not in my Bible or Bible app. But I would say for most people, there's no section. At first glance, there's not really a clear direction or indicator of how we date, and so dating becomes really confusing because there's so much clarity around a lot of other things, but there's not a lot of clarity in the church, in the Bible, around dating.
Yeah.
So I know today we kind of wanted to start with kind of this overview of what should our approach to dating be?
Yeah.
What is the biblical approach to dating? How do we pull from what the Bible does have to say about this whole avenue of romantic love and translate that into dating? And I really do think the first thing that we have to do there is we do have to look at God's design for romantic love, which we mostly see played out in marriage.
Sure.
And kind of from there, reverse engineer it.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying
Yeah.
it. I like how you said that, actually. Because what we don't want to do, I mean, Christian, we were talking about this before. What we don't want to do is like over glorify marriage. And honestly, I've seen that a lot in the church, and you've seen that a lot, where I think we look at single people sometimes as like broken or damaged because they don't have this, or even like incomplete, because we glorify marriage. We glorify like what you could be, and like I used to think that I couldn't be fully a godly woman until I was married. Like I really believed that I wouldn't be fully what God intended me to be if I weren't married.
Yeah.
And that's so far from the truth. So
sure.
I think, just to be clear, like, I agree with you. I think there's a sense of like, let's start with this design of how like two people were created in the image of God perfectly, equally, but uniquely. And that his intention ultimately for like romantic love, like you said, is marriage. And like, we've screwed that up in the world, if you will, but also in the church. But we need to kind of get back to like what his idea was for that,
Yeah.
and then kind of reverse engineer from there. I
Yep.
agree. Like, how do we date? I mean,
Yep.
how do I approach like a man? How does a man approach a woman? How do
Yep.
we actually intentionally date as believers? I love how you said that.
Yeah, and just to echo it, like, this is not this episode, at least in my opinion, and I believe it's in yours as well. We're not going to answer all those questions. We want to continue to answer a lot of those really practical, nitty-gritty questions of, okay, practically, how does this play out? We just know that we can't answer any of those questions until we lay the foundation.
Yeah,
and I love how you said that too, because I think at parts of my life I have struggled with two things, which is number one, a proper view of marriage, because at times in the way I was raised in a Christian home, Christian private school, all that stuff, I was very much taught the same thing. Hey, to reach some level of spiritual superiority or to arrive, you have to be a married individual.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you unlock this status and identity of a more spiritual man, and it couldn't be farther from the truth.
No.
And the second thing is, I've also wrestled with at points in my life, and I'm sure a lot of people listening have as well, is like, why even get married? Right? Is there even a point to marriage? And again, we don't want to focus too much on marriage because this is really about dating, but we have to kind of go there and reverse engineer it to understand the lens in which we're supposed to view dating with. And so we have to start there. We have to go back and look at, okay, when God first created man and woman, what did he intend? He looked at Adam, the first man he created, and he said, hey, in everything that was good and perfect, nothing bad, no sin had entered the world. He looked at Adam and said, well, it's not good for him to be alone.
Yeah.
And so for anybody who's listening who's like, hey, I don't want to be alone, I want to go through life with a companion,
It's a good desire.
It's a great desire. It's a God-given one, and it's not a bad thing. For anyone who doesn't feel that way and you want to be single, more power to you.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother conversation, but seriously, more power to you. But from starting there, so God creates Adam, and then from Adam, he pulls from Adam and says, hey, in a unique way, in the same value, but in a different way that I want to image myself, I'm going to create woman. And God brings them together in the garden. And we look at that and we say that's our picture of marriage. If you've been to weddings, you might have heard it quoted before. It's, hey, a man shall leave his father and his mother, and the two shall become one flesh. And that is a reference to sexual intimacy and in that context. And so the first thing that we get there, God's design for romantic love to flourish and to be good is between one man, one woman, inside the context of marriage. That is like sexually, romantically, that is the place where God is going. That is the pinnacle. That's the place we're trying to get to. That's what this is all about. And then we go to the New Testament. Every time Jesus is asked about anything relative to that, his answer always revolves around, hey, go back to the beginning.
Yes.
Go back to what my father said. Go back to what he had originally designed this to be.
That's
and
true.
anything different from that, hey, throw that definition away because it doesn't agree with what my father first intended and created in perfection. And he didn't create it to be mean or harmful or limiting.
Yeah.
He created it to flourish. God looked at it and all that was good and said, hey, there's kind of one thing missing here for this man. It's this woman. Not to say that, hey, the woman completed the man or the man completed the woman, but an essence of, hey, I want to create something deep. I want to create a relational experience. This, again, in the English language, is, I think the best term we have is romantic love, for them to experience with one another, and that's going to culminate most fully and flourish most fully, in the context of marriage.
Yeah.
And so from there, we have to kind of look at that lens and go, okay, so this is what God designed the pinnacle of romantic love to be. We have to ask ourselves now in 2023, as Christians, non-Christians, whatever, if we're going to get behind that and see that, and if you're wrestling with that, I really would encourage you to dig into that. Go read Genesis. Go read Jesus' words on it. Really dig into and study, hey, what did God intend here and why is this good?
Yeah.
We have to start attacking the conversation of dating from that standpoint. And I think from there is where we really start to pull, okay, what are my roles in this? Because I really do think that when we're looking at dating, we do have to really establish a why behind it. I think that's the biggest thing that points in my life I missed. I don't know if I think you would say the same thing as we've talked about it.
Yeah.
Is I was kind of dating with no purpose. And I'm happily married now to my wife, Emma, love her to death.
Yeah.
But I really do think there were parts of my life where it felt like I was just floating in the waters of the dating pool with no intention, no why, no clarity behind it. And the more that I started to understand this concept of marriage and this concept of God's design for romantic love flourishing in this context, it really helped me gain some clarity around why I was dating and how I was going to date. And it was built out of understanding, okay, if this is what God intends for marriage, how do I get to that point? How do I date in such a way where that is the goal in mind, that's the target in mind, and in every way, shape, or form that I date and who I date is going to be trying to get there, but also reflecting that. And I think that's where that conversation becomes really important. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I really appreciate that setup. I feel like that's spot on. I think the tension, though, not it's not even to push back. I think maybe just to add, the tension though is like, how do we value that lens that you just gave us and go like, I believe in what God created and designed and believe that it's inherently good, right? So how do I value that while also not making this image of marriage ultimate in my life? So like I'm only dating. So I think valuing it with the lens of like marriage is a goal. I mean, marriage, we say this in the church, it's like so cliche, but like dating is not the destination. It is a journey. And
it's on a t-shirt somewhere.
Yeah, it's on a t-shirt somewhere. It sounds super nice, but we're saying that I don't think we should value dating in the sense of like the way that we've started valuing dating. But at the same time, like, don't over glorify marriage. Like, don't do everything that you're doing all for the sake of like, this person will complete me. Because at the end of the
100%.
day, I think the reason to have like a secure why you're pursuing dating, correct me if I'm wrong, please, but it's because you've like found so much fulfillment, identity, and purpose in who you are, who God says you are, before anyone else ever came into the picture, whether you're married or not. And that still has to be true within a marriage
100%.
for me and Connor, you know? So do you know what I'm saying? Like
100%.
That's tension.
What I hear you saying is don't date for dating's sake and don't get married for marriage's sake.
That's
which is huge, right? And what I also hear you saying, which I do think step one in dating, and this is really a conversation around singleness in this aspect, figure out who you are and learn to love yourself. Learn to be complete without somebody, because like I said in the beginning, when God created Adam was fine.
Yeah.
Adam was not questioning who he was. Sin had not entered the world. There was nothing to break him, his identity, his relationship with God. And so God looked at him and said, hey, it's good to make a companion for him. And ezer kenegdo is the term. A lot of people say helper, which sounds really demeaning, but it's a term that alludes to the companion nature of Christ. When he spoke woman into it and said, hey, I'm going to give him a companion. In his completeness, I want to bring him another complete human being so that they can have companionship on this world in relationship with me. And I think we have to start there to go, okay, before I'm even ready to date, I got to make sure that I have done the work to figure out how am I going to agree with what God says about me, which is I'm good. I'm not guilty. There's nothing wrong with me. I was made on purpose. I'm worthy of love. I'm worthy of giving love. Until we can answer that question, it's dating is going to be tough. We have to be able to step into that. But I love what you're saying in this nature too, because it's like, again, don't date for date's sake and don't get married for marriage's sake. Because when we actually look, and this is what we'll unpack next, when we actually look at the picture of marriage in the Bible, it is about so much more than just being with somebody.
Absolutely.
Like when we really break it down. So again, we will go back to Genesis, and I won't do all the fancy work that other people have done that I'd rip off and that have taught me some stuff about this. But what we really see is God pressing into man and saying, I'm making him in my image. The Imago Dei is what it's called. I'm making him in my image. And in a way, I'm going to reflect the masculine side of who I am. And when he created women, he said, I'm going to press in the same way, but uniquely. I'm going to press my image into them and create a unique feminine image of who I am. And when I bring them together, the first thing that does is it creates this reflective picture of the image of God. And so when we're thinking of dating, when we're thinking of marriage, right, and dating to get to marriage, but specifically in this context, dating, I think one of the first questions we have to ask ourselves that brings some of that intentionality, which the key word here is intentionality. The why behind it is Am I dating to reflect, if I'm a man, am I dating to reflect the masculine image of God to the women of this world? And as I'm pursuing another woman, am I valuing and cherishing and doing what I can? And we just had a conversation with Dan Foote about this, where he defined really well, hey, the definition of love is to yield and protect for the benefit of somebody else.
That's
to
good.
yield and provide and protect for the benefit of somebody else.
Ooh.
Am I serving, protecting, and providing for the image of God in that woman? And that's the type of intentionality I'm going to date with, whether or not I marry her, whether or not we go on another date, whether or not we date for 6 months and I end it, she ends it. Am I dating in such a way where my goal is, how am I going to reflect the masculine image of God to the world to the best of my ability, and screwing up and giving myself grace and all of that? And how am I going to look at this person and go, how do I protect and live in such a way that I am creating environments and spaces for the feminine image of God to flourish in her, and vice versa?
Okay, so let's get a little practical. And I know that as I put this question on you, I'm sure it's going to come back to me, and I don't know if I have a good answer, but let's get practical. I think, first of all, high level view, we talk about identity a lot on here. We cannot talk about like these other concepts until we talk about identity. So I hope that people are hearing like the most important thing is to know God and to know who you are in him. Like, and again, going back to Genesis, I believe in that. So we always start from that basis of like who God says that we are, period. From there, like now, Christian, you kind of just did this, but I would just look at you and be like, all right, so talking to single Christian, talking to the single men right now, how do they date intentionally as they are discovering who they are in Christ, but still wrestling with that, still trying to figure out themselves, but also like lead and pursue a woman, but also like not put too much pressure on this being the one, you know, or this going somewhere. How can they do that today?
Oh, I'm definitely throwing this back on you, for
gosh,
sure.
All right,
but so be thinking. My first answer, and I won't go too much into this, is don't do a lot of what I did, because in so many ways I think I screwed this up and I jacked this up. But the first thing that I would say is this, and it goes back to what we said: please find contentment, a sense of peace with who you are as a man. I think for so much of my life, I wanted a woman, and specifically a wife, but also girlfriends in my life, to make me feel secure in my masculinity, in the sense of, if a woman would deem me worthy enough of being with, of respecting, of getting behind, of cherishing, whatever it was, then there's an aspect of that where I deemed myself worthy enough as a person, because I had a feminine presence in my life that could love me back and that I could take care of. And some of that was born of just like really good natural desire to want to be with somebody. But in so many ways that got out of whack, and I was trying to essentially find a contentment and a peace in a woman that I can only find in God. So that's first and foremost is, man, if that struck you in any way, for lack of a better term, get to the bottom of that, man. Work on that. If you're sitting here going, I don't know if I love myself, I don't know if I like myself, I don't know if I'm content in this, and I'm dating to fill a hole, address that and address it right away. Secondarily, this is where I would turn to, so we kind of went over what happened in the garden, and I would turn to Paul's words in Ephesians 5. Again, a passage about marriage. It's quoted at weddings a lot. I've used it at weddings I've done before. It was said at my wedding. Paul basically says, hey, so the second purpose of marriage and the second purpose of romantic love in any context is to reflect the relationship that Jesus Christ has with his church. And he talks specifically to men, and he says, hey, love your wives like Christ has loved the church.
And what does the church mean in that context?
The church in that context is the followers of Jesus, the people who Jesus loves, who he died for. Yes. And it goes on and it says, hey, the way that Christ loved the church is he laid his life down for her. He put his wants, needs, and desires secondarily, put our wants, needs primarily, and said, I see a need, and I see something that is blocking the flourishing of the image of God in them. So therefore, I'm going to lay down my life to make it possible that that image could flourish. Now, I'm not saying that we as men, our job is to die, but it could be one day, right? But I'm not saying that like we get on a cross and die. It means that we take what we have and we leverage it in such a way that we're setting up the people in our lives to flourish, specifically the women to flourish. So yeah, when we're looking at that again, if marriage is the ultimate culmination of romantic love flourishing, and we reverse engineer that to a dating context, I think I have less like practical do this and don't do that, more of an approach and question you should ask, which is like, again, when you're on a date with somebody, and I'm not saying, first date, whatever it is, it's not super serious, but the approach that you have to have going into it is, how do I become the type of man that uses what God has given me, the time, the talents, the money, the gifts, the identity that God has given me? how do I put that secondarily and live in such a way where I am creating an environment in this relational context for this woman in my life to flourish, for the image of God to be made manifest in her, for her to agree, because this world is full of things that are trying to come and attack women's identity.
Yeah.
Tell them they are just an object, they are just physical, they are nothing more than their appearance. All they can offer is what they can offer sexually. They're whatever it is.
Yeah.
My job, and I am saying this, I do not do this perfectly with my wife. There are many nights where I've done this well, and a lot of nights where I've ended up on the floor apologizing to my wife almost in tears because I've screwed this one up. But my job is to make sure that whatever's going on in her life, I am protecting and defending and reinforcing the good, pure, awesome things that God says about her. And so how do you practically do that in dating? Well, that needs to be our why. That needs to be our intentionality. That needs to be my approach. When I'm on a date with somebody, my approach has to be, how do I treat this woman and pursue this woman and value this woman in such a way that agrees with what God says about her? Meaning, I'm dating because I want to find a companion, right? Which is a good thing. But the way I treat her physically, it means, okay, if God said sex is reserved for marriage, and the rest of the world is telling this woman you are only as valuable as your sexuality, I am going to treat her in such a way where I go, the way that I talk to you, the way that I interact with you physically, the places I take you, the things I say, whatever it is, I am valuing you more than your physical body. I am valuing you because the feminine image of God has been pressed within you, and so everything I do, everything I'm committed to, and again, I'm going to fail and we're going to need grace, but it's committed to making sure that that image of God in you flourishes and that you are able to see and agree with that. So it's more of a principalistic approach in that way, where we have to approach dating in every facet and say, as men, and this is how we lead, right? Leading is not just going, come follow me. Leading is, I'm going to take the first step. I'm going to go first, and I'm going to make sure that the way that I treat you, doesn't matter what the rest of the world is doing, the way that I treat you when you're with me, you can walk away believing a little bit more and hopefully feeling a little bit more. That dude sees me like Jesus sees me. He does not think I'm just a body. He does not think I am less than as a woman. He treats me as equal but different and looks at me and says, hey, I want to love you like Jesus loved you. And again, that's not saying on the first date that you sit there with a squirrel and go, all right, for the rest of my life. But it's like, you walk away from that friendly interaction that a first date can be, an easy, hey, who are you? And they can walk away going like, here's the reality, right? For most women, oh my God, he didn't try to get in my pants. And some of you may be sitting there rolling your eyes, but for a lot of people, it's like, that's a reality.
No, a lot of women just like took a sigh of relief after you were saying that and probably felt like, hell yeah. Like there was a lot of women who just heard that, myself included, who are like louder for the people in the back. Like I don't want to be like, drop the mic, but not because of what you said, but because this is what God showed us. This is the way that Jesus showed us. This is how it was designed. Like, to lead women. This is why I love Flatirons, if I'm being honest. We are unapologetically the man church. I'm saying that in quotes. We are not a church just for men, but we unapologetically run after the hearts of men because we believe in God's image in them as leaders. Like that doesn't mean women are not leaders.
Absolutely.
I don't want to go down this rabbit trail, but I will say I have felt more what you're describing, more leveraged, more empowered, more loved, more valued, more cared for in an environment like Flatirons, surrounded by people who are running after the image of what it means to be a godly man.
Absolutely.
And that is the way it should be, For sure. So it is not meant to diminish at all. I mean, men and women were created in the image and likeness of God, you know?
100%. And if I could say one more thing on it real quick too, because I really do want to make this clear. And I do like men specifically for you who are listening. I don't want to take this tone and approach of like, be a man, because I don't respond well to that one. But let me say this. Hey, if you are listening to this, fellas, let's step up in this one, man.
Yeah. When it comes to dating
specifically, let's step up in this one. Let's, regardless of whether or not the women that we go on dates with, that we're friends with, the women we're married to, that we are dating, whether or not that ends up in a lifelong marriage, right? Whether or not we get there, let's be men who, with the women that we interact with in any romantic context, no matter what their background is, no matter what their current status is, no matter what their future is going to be, they walk away from an interaction with us going like, I felt valued and loved for the reasons that God says I should be valued and loved.
Dude.
And if we don't know what that is, let's go freaking study our Bibles. Let's get into it. Let's ask questions. Come to Young Adults. DM us. I am more than happy for anybody in the Colorado area or beyond, if you want to Zoom, to talk through this stuff because it is so important. Leadership is such a weird thing, and we've talked about this in a couple episodes. But fellas, let's go first. That's what it means to lead. Let's just make a commitment right now to do this and lean into that because it's so desperately needed in today's
really
world.
Good. Yeah, that's really good.
And so, sorry, continue with what you're going to say, but
no, I don't know. Nothing.
I'm
That
getting
was
ready
just
to-
really good, and I appreciate you saying all that.
Well, I'm honestly getting ready to throw it back to you
Gosh.
because I would love to know in the same context. It's like trust me, through being married for it'll be almost 3 years now, I still feel like I just don't. Like I'm trying so hard to like figure my wife out and the women in my life out, and I'm like, I just don't. I'm like, oh my gosh, I suck at this. But really, when it comes to this aspect of looking at again marriage being this design, and let's just throw marriage, romantic love flourishing in this design, and it culminates in marriage. Translating that to dating, how would you speak to women? How do they practically start from an approach standpoint? How do they start wrestling with that and living out what it means to honor and abide by this design that God had and reverse engineer that to the context of marriage in 2023?
Well, I'm not going to say anything revolutionary. I actually think we've covered a lot of it. So I'll just ditto the first thing you said because it goes back to like, hey, ladies, the same as Christian leaning into the men. Like, even if you can't admit it right now, like, find out who God says that you are. It is way more valuable than you could ever imagine. It is way more valuable than what you've been handed. It is way more valuable than the most valuable person in your life has told you. Like you have no idea like your inherent worth. You have even if you have an idea, we have no idea truly like the design of God's creation and the people that he said, I created you to like actually rule over what my kingdom and like what I've entrusted to you. So, hey, ladies, like you're valuable. And that's, gosh, this sounds so cliche, but you have to go and discover who it is that God says you were. Okay. Well, we've talked about that so much. So that's just first and foremost. And with that, now entering into a dating relationship, we kind of talked about this on the last episode, like that God's image in you and through you and having a confidence about that, like a humble confidence in knowing who you are. Now give yourself grace and permission to go on dates and trust yourself to know when it's yes, I'm going to take this further or no, I'm not.
What do you mean by that? Unpack that.
Gosh, I mean, I'm speaking from experience on this one. Like I went through a season of probably I could not live without a man. So I was always in a relationship. A lot of people know this about my story. And I can only now with some hindsight look back and see how that was really bred out of a place of brokenness, how it was a place of like, I need a man in my life to tell me who I am or to make me feel any sense of value and worth. Then I actually stepped into a season of intentional singleness or whatever. I was single for a while. I refused to go on dates. I said no to dates. It was the most freeing experience of my life because I had never said no to dates. So I was just practicing boundaries. Really healthy and intentional season of my life because that is where I feel like God made himself like so known to like how close he was to me. He was just reiterating who I was, you know. That's when I discovered who I was. But then came a season where I think I made singleness ultimate. I mean, I was hanging on to it for dear life. Like, this is who I am. I know who I am. And I wasn't even like giving myself permission to go on dates because I think out of a little bit of fear of dating again and some of the past stuff, but also just like, nope, I found a contentment. I don't want to lose it. I found I know who I am and I don't need anybody, you know?
Yeah.
Then I think what I came to find, to just make a long story short, is that Christ in me and what we talked about last week, like I had the freedom to go on dates, to have fun, like to allow myself to be known as much as I wanted, to get to know people, and then to trust myself with God that I could say, this is not going.
Yeah.
I'm dating with an intention. So just to circle back to that, I think that this would be my other piece for women, like girls, go in with an intention. Seriously, you don't have to like map it out. You don't have to give them the bullet points. You have to be like, okay, well, by the third date, we should be talking about marriage or what. I'm not saying anything like that, but like, why? Just going back to what you said in the beginning, like, why? Why are you going on the date? Like, why are you dating? Why are you letting someone pursue you? Why are you pursuing? Like, what is it that is fulfilling and satisfying in this relationship? That is it becoming ultimate? Is it taking the place of God and what he's capable of doing in
Yeah.
your life? Or is it like, I mean, just be intentional. Just be
So
intent.
good.
Like, I think just stepping into the relationship and having a woman be like, yo, I'm not saying this is ending in marriage. Definitely not tomorrow. I'm not saying to do this on the first date either, by any means. Like, get to know the person.
For sure.
But go in and be intentional. What do you want out of this? Where is this headed for you?
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong here. So what I hear you saying, to kind of summarize what you just said, is this: the advice that you're giving to young women who are wanting to pursue dating is this specifically: spend the time that you need to spend working on yourself, working on loving yourself, just like we talked about, finding out who you are in Christ is the term, finding out what God says about you and being rooted in what that is. And then from that point, from that place, you can learn to trust yourself, to give yourself freedom to step into dating because you know who you are, and therefore you know how to be treated and what decisions to make. And so it kind of starts with the identity, and then from there, stop overcomplicating dating and just give yourself freedom to go, no, I know who I am. I know how I deserve to be loved. And so therefore I'm going to go on a date. And if this guy loves me well, great. And if he doesn't, he's a D-bag and I'm getting out of here.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you know those things, you said that so well. Because when you know those things, you're going to have like red flags going off in your mind when there's a red flag. You're going to know your line. I didn't have that. Like I did not have those boundaries at all. I was like, oh, that feels wrong, but oh, he's so sweet.
Yeah.
And he's so funny, you know? But no, you're going to know when you know your inherent worth and value, and you start with the reverse engineering, when you start with what God says about you, when you're sitting in a dating thing. I'm not saying like to have these rigid, strict do's and don'ts of a list. Like that's a whole other podcast. Like you're going to have to be sacrificial in what you can't have the perfect image of the perfect person, right?
Yep.
They're not perfect. But I am saying you're going to know very quickly when there's a red flag. You're going to know very quickly when that's a boundary that's not supposed to be crossed because I know who I am.
Would you mind if, and this is kind of a question that I don't know if you're super prepared for, but I'd love to ask you on the cuff. What are those red flags? Would you say, as someone who's been to that point, like what are the things that you would lean into and encourage young women to say, like, hey, this specific action does not agree with what God says? And I'm not saying that like, because here's the other thing that I think we do with dating sometimes. We put unrealistic and unfair on expectations on human beings to be this perfect spiritual Christian whatever. And here's the reality: we got to go in with an expectation of grace that like this person's gonna screw it up at some point. But the desire and the want to and the effort is there to try to be the best they can be, I think, is the key. So we're not saying that like if he goes in there and he makes one mistake, you're out.
No.
But what are some of those red flags? Like for women specifically, like men, it's so oriented around like I'm coming in with the decision of how I'm going to treat women. What are those things that you're looking at going, hey, if he doesn't treat you this way, look into it?
This is how it was for me. If the first thing that a guy communicates is that he just wants to take you home and sleep with you, I truly do think that is a red flag. If upon getting to know you, charming you, all of those other things, but then very quickly communicates like the next step in this relationship is the physical aspect. I'm not saying that they're broken. I'm not demonizing that person. And also like I was that person. But I'm saying like according to, again, what we just talked about, imaging God, what God intended marriage to be, his design, like we're not forcing it down anyone's throat. I'm saying like what he says is right and good for us and will actually make for a life that is of value and that will help us flourish as women. Like if that's the first thing that they're inquiring or implying, I think that's a red flag.
That's good, dude.
I do.
Well, and I think it needs to be said as well because, I mean, that's just the reality for, I think, so many dating relationships. The world of dating is that is so present and that exists. And listen, if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know if I agree with what the Bible says about sex and if I should wait.
Yeah, I opened up a different can.
For sure. But no, I think it's important to lean into that because what you are saying is, and what I hear you saying is, at some point in your life, Ambry made a decision to go, I agree with what God says about me.
Right.
And because I agree with what God says about me, and we actually have a great podcast with Ambry and her husband about how their reasoning behind waiting for marriage to have sex. And it's fantastic. It's a great
with
podcast.
Each other,
yes.
but not before then.
Right.
Just
right.
to be clear.
And even if you're wrestling with that, it's like, I totally understand the questions behind it. I totally get it. That's a whole nother podcast for another time. But again, we're building from this standpoint of this is what God says is the best context for romantic love to flourish. And so therefore the way that we date is going to be valuing and protecting and having that in mind.
Yeah.
And what I hear you saying, Amber, is you made a decision to go like, hey, I agree with what God says about me, so therefore I'm going to value this.
Yeah.
So that's why that's out of bounds for me, is because, and that's why that's a red flag, is because that to you was communicating this guy does not have God's best intentions in mind. And here's the reality.
Or even know. Like,
yeah, or know what they are. Yeah.
Like, not even to, again, point fingers at
Yep.
him. Like, he just doesn't even know, but
Yep.
I do now.
Yeah.
You know, I do
Yeah.
know my inherent worth and value. And I'm not saying he's intentionally trying to devalue me.
For
He's a
sure.
good guy.
Yep.
I'm sure they're great guys. But because I know that's my boundary,
Yeah.
that's my line. And because you tried to take me home, this is a red flag. And a red flag meaning like they're not the bad person, but it's a red flag for me because that's where I draw a line. I would also say another one, Christian, honestly, is ghosting.
Ooh.
Like
That was funny. I went, ooh.
No. Boo. Oh man, like don't get me started. Like
Dig into it,
especially
yeah.
in the world of online dating, and I feel like I almost want to talk to the men a little bit,
Please
but
do.
like ask a girl on a date, and if it's not working out, freaking tell her.
To her face.
Tell her to her face. I promise you. And I bet there's a few guys who are like, oh yeah, right. Like you say that, but then all women are gonna. I'm like, no, I promise you, because again, it goes back to value and worth. Women want that. We want to know we are valuable. And they're probably thinking like, so me dumping them that's telling them they're not valuable. I'm like, but if you freaking ghost them. Ghosting them is making them question everything about their value. It's making them make up a narrative. Like where there is a lack of information, we will fill in a story. And so rather than you just bringing clarity, which I believe is good honoring leadership, which is good godly leadership, like, hey, I don't care what reasons it's for. Like you can approach that in a gracious way. Like you have the discernment to know like the wisdom of how to break things off with somebody, but stop this culture. Like stop it. Ghosting is harmful.
Yeah.
And I can be harmful the other way around too. I'm definitely not saying this is just like women are victims of ghosting, but like I just want to speak like to the men specifically. If you are somebody who has just like dropped a woman and not responded to her, like, and you call yourself a believer and a follower of Christ, like please stop. A woman needs to know like someone actually looked them in the face and said, I don't see this going somewhere and this is why. And because I still value like the image of God or you don't have to say this, but like you value the image of God in them.
Words.
Yes. Then I'm just gonna have to tell you like it's better to stop this now than to continue. It's gonna end up in more hurt down the road. Or you're more valuable than me just dragging you along when really I don't like you.
Yeah.
Or I'm not having fun with you. Like that is okay. Or this is not what I pictured a future. Again, I'm dating with intention. I want something to come of this. I don't see a future with you. I think many women listening to the sound of my voice would agree, like, please just spell it out for me. Please, men, stop ghosting. And of course, it can be the other way around.
Oh, yeah. I would say it's vice versa as well. But I love what you said, because I do think that the biggest enemy to leadership, and specifically like being men who want to value women as God says they're worth being valued, is passivity. Right. And I'll speak from times where like I've done that. I've been a part of that. Is like it's been passivity. I was too afraid to own up to, because I was afraid I was going to hurt her feelings, right? And my intentions were not to hurt her feelings, but in the midst of that, it's like what I actually did communicate was like, hey, all you were was a fun fling. And what I'm assuming that did to their brains, to their view of themselves was just so torturous and toxic. I'm not saying they wouldn't have been hurt if it's like you still, you break up with them, and breakups just suck. That's just a reality. But again, what you're saying is it's having enough respect for them to sit down and go like, you're a fantastic person. I see the image of God in you. I'm just letting you know that I don't think that this is going to continue, but I'm valuing you enough to sit down with you and tell you why. And honestly, if they throw a drink in your face, man, that's on them, not on you. You take every nth degree step that you can possibly take to value that in them. And so I'm 100% with you. Also, if you don't mind, I want to mention something you mentioned around the sexuality stuff.
Sure.
I know that you mentioned, hey, when men are doing this, they're not bad people. That here's the reality of what I've learned with my own battle with my own sexuality and how I view sex and sex with women, all this different stuff. It is, to an extent, fellas specifically, dude, it's selfish, man. It is. I have been in the mindset where my goal was to go to a party, to go to the bar, to go to wherever, just to try to get some, just to try to get with a girl. My mindset in that place every single time was the goal was sex or anything close to it. Like that was the destination. That was my intention. That was my why. And it was incredibly selfish. When you are in that mindset, because here's just the reality, when your hormones take over as a dude, you're just not thinking with it. The old adage is you're thinking with a different head. If you don't know what that means, sorry, but this is the podcast, so that's what we're talking about here. But really, like when you're operating out of that mindset, like it can be very, very selfish. So I also don't think we should sit here and be justifying our, for lack of a better term, our sexual desires and how we're acting on them as, oh, I just didn't know. Bro, a lot of you do. I know that I did. I knew exactly what I was doing. I just didn't want to admit it. Let's admit it. And again, guys, there's so much grace. Getting that, handling your sexuality, fighting hormone, it's a real thing. And I first and foremost, my wife and I did not do it perfectly. You and Connor opened up about your story. It's like, hey, fellas, there's so much grace in that. But again, drawing it back to that line, can we be men who stand up and go, hey, when we get that wrong, can we own it?
Yeah.
When we get that wrong, can we address it? And hey, can we go in with the intention of going like, I don't want to do that. And if I do, I'm gonna own it. I'm gonna give myself grace. I'm gonna ask this person to give me grace, and I'm gonna do my best to do better the next time. But I don't. You said that, and I went, hey, I don't know if that's fully accurate. That could just be me.
No, I appreciate
but
that.
I feel like I need to say that.
It's probably me just like wanting to also protect the men and like give grace. I think just the grace side of me.
Yep.
But I really do appreciate you saying that because I also agree with that. I think all in all, like doing the bigger thing or sometimes doing the thing that God says is right and true is very countercultural. Like doing the bigger thing is oftentimes the harder thing.
Yeah.
A lot of times we live in a world that makes it easy for you to do the easy passive thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's really easy to hide behind a text message. It's really easy to ghost somebody. It's really easy to take somebody home with you. Like it actually takes a lot more willpower, a lot more discernment, a lot more like, God, give me the strength, like show me who I am, a lot more even trial and error and like being met with grace. Like it takes a lot more effort sometimes to do the right thing. But I think what we're doing is like calling
less traveled. Yeah.
Calling people out on that. If you call yourself a believer, then we're saying like be different in the dating world.
Yep. If you call yourself a believer, call yourself to a different and higher standard.
You do. And it's not always going to be like difficult either, but it's also not promised to be easy.
100%.
So rise to that, rise to live above reproach and stand out in a world that makes the easy thing too easy.
Let's go. I love that. Yeah, and I think just kind of a closing thought on that as well. Again, if we haven't driven this home enough, I don't want to keep driving it home. Hey, the whole takeaway I hope everybody's hearing from this conversation, what I had to learn, what I know you said you'd learn is like discover your why.
Yeah.
Discover and be intentional. Like when you're coming to dating, figure out who God says you are, figure out who God says the opposite sex is, and be intentional.
And why would you date out of that place?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Discover your why, have really clear clarity, because when you have clarity, it's going to make all of those decisions that honestly right now feel really complicated.
Yeah.
In this weird roundabout, only God can kind of teach you and show you a way. It makes those decisions really clear. Should I go home with her or should I not? Okay. Well, I have more clarity about my intention around dating, and my intention is this. I'm not going to go home with her.
Yeah.
Hey, when I'm upset and I want to call her this word that I'm going to sound like such a Christian here, but I mean this. Every single song lyric is referring to her as blank, which I've also screwed up. As blank. Hey, because I'm dating with this intentionality, even when I'm pissed off, and frustrated, that turns off. That I'm not using that one. I'm not talking to her that way. Hey, when all of my friends, all my buddies, all my whatever, everything I'm seeing on social media is saying, go do this, this, and this, because my intentionality, my why is clear, I know I'm going to handle this situation. I know I'm going to talk to her. I know how I'm going to talk to him. I know any of those contexts. So that's the big thing we want you guys to take away, and everyone listening take away from this, that we still need to work on and sure up even in our own marriages. But it's like, be intentional.
Yeah.
Clear up your why.
Yep.
And make sure that why agrees with what God says. And here's like the promise that I will make, that I'm fine making. You do that and it's in line with what God says. Trust him in this and watch what happens in your life. Watch how clear things get. Watch the clarity that can come in your dating life. And take that risk to trust God with how romantic love flourishes and see what happens.
Yeah.
Say, hey, if marriage is there and I'm going to honor my dating life from that standpoint of if that's the goal, the way I'm going to treat and date people is with that in mind. Watch what happens.
See what happens. Yeah. Intentionality breeds clarity, and God gives us a roadmap for intentionality.
Yep.
Maybe not a step-by-step of how to date and when to take the person to Chili's versus a really nice steakhouse.
There you go. I love Chili's.
But he does give us a roadmap for how to be intentional with one another, in relationship with one another, and how to know who we are.
Let's go.
All right.
Yep. That's all, folks.
Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys on the next episode.
Boom.